Most people walk past it without a second thought. It grows along ponds, roadside ditches, and marshes most people avoid entirely. Few people know its name. Fewer still know that for thousands of years, entire communities depended on it for food. Some foragers call it the supermarket of the swamp. And that description was not metaphor. It was documentation. It grows along the edges of ponds, in roadside ditches, in marshes most people avoid entirely. Its long, flat leaves rise straight out of shallow water. Its brown cylindrical spike stands tall above the surrounding vegetation. It requires nothing from anyone. Most people do not know its name. Most people have never considered eating it. But for thousands of years, across North America, Europe, and Asia, communities living near wetlands relied on this plant as a dependable source of food. Not occasionally, not as a last resort. Regularly, seasonally, predictably. Nearly every part of it was usable, and people who lived near water knew exactly how to use each one. Some foragers called it the supermarket of the swamp. That description was not metaphor. It was documentation. Some knowledge was never lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered. In this film, we explore how cattail worked as a food system, which communities depended on it, and why, and what happened when a plant that once fed entire populations quietly disappeared from everyday life. The plant is called cattail. Its scientific name is Typha latifolia, though several related species grow in similar environments. It is found on every continent except Antarctica, in wetlands, along riverbanks, at the edges of lakes and ponds. Its tolerance for standing water makes it one of the most widely distributed plants on Earth. In terms of geography, few food plants come close to its range. Cattail grows in cold northern climates and subtropical regions alike. It colonizes disturbed wetlands and natural marshes. It spreads through underground rhizomes, forming dense colonies that can persist for decades. What made cattail remarkable as a food source was not any single quality. It was the combination of parts, each available at a different time of year, each offering something distinct. In early spring, before most other wild plants have emerged, cattail produces young shoots rising from the base of the plant. These shoots can be harvested when they are still tender, typically 6 to 12 inches tall, and eaten raw or cooked. The texture is similar to cucumber. The flavor is mild. Indigenous communities across North America ate them as vegetables, treating them much the way modern kitchens treat asparagus or leek. A few weeks later, as the plant matures, the female flower head emerges still wrapped in its green sheath. At this stage, it can be boiled and eaten like corn on the cob. The flavor is subtle but real. This window is short, lasting only a week or two before the flower opens and the opportunity passes. Then comes pollen season. In late spring and early summer, the male flower spike, positioned just above the brown female spike, releases large quantities of yellow pollen. In a mature cattail stand, this pollen can be collected in quantity by bending the stalks over a bag or container and shaking. The pollen is fine, dry, and bright yellow. It has been used as a flour substitute or mixed with conventional flour for centuries. Bread, pancakes, and porridge made with cattail pollen have a slightly yellow tint and a mild, faintly sweet flavor. One study examining traditional food practices among Great Lakes indigenous communities documented cattail pollen being used as a supplement to other starches during the late spring period, when stored winter foods were running low and summer harvests had not yet begun. The timing was not accidental. Cattail offered food precisely when other sources were most scarce. Later in the season, the focus shifts underground. Cattail produces horizontal underground stems called rhizomes. These rhizomes store significant quantities of starch throughout the year, but they are especially rich in late fall and early spring. To access the starch, the rhizomes are dug from the mud, cleaned, and processed. The most common method is to crush or pound the rhizomes in water, allowing the starch to separate and sink. The water is then drained, and the starch is dried or used immediately. The yield is substantial. In some wetland ecosystems, cattail rhizomes can produce more usable starch per acre than cultivated wheat fields. Yet almost no modern agriculture even considers wetlands as food landscapes. Research published in the journal Economic Botany estimated that a single acre of cattail marsh can produce more starch per unit of area than wheat grown under favorable conditions. In some wetland environments, the productivity of cattail rhizome starch exceeded that of potato. That comparison is rarely made in modern food discussions. Wetlands are not typically thought of as productive food environments. But for communities who understood what was growing there, they functioned as reliable, renewable food systems. The communities who understood this best were those who had lived near wetlands for generations. Among the Ojibwe, Cree, and many other First Nations of North America, cattail was integrated into seasonal food practices in ways that required specific knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The timing of harvest mattered. Which part to take at which stage of growth mattered. How to process the rhizomes without losing the starch mattered. This was not casual foraging. It was systematic ecological knowledge. Cattail was also used well beyond food. The leaves were woven into mats, baskets, and the walls of shelters. The dried seed fluff, the white downy material that makes the cattail spike disintegrate in late summer, was used as insulation in clothing and bedding. The stalks were used as building material. The roots were applied medicinally to burns and skin irritations. The degree to which a single plant could serve multiple functions within a single community was not unusual among traditional food cultures, but cattail was particularly versatile, partly because of its abundance and partly because different parts of the plant served different purposes across different seasons. This multi-season, multi-use quality is what separates cattail from most plants in the modern food system. Contemporary agriculture operates on the logic of specialization. A crop is grown for one purpose, harvested at one moment, and processed through one supply chain. Cattail does not fit that model. Its value is distributed across time and function in a way that industrial systems struggle to accommodate. That structural mismatch, more than any other factor, explains why cattail never made the transition from traditional food source to commercial crop. The decline of cattail as an everyday food did not happen suddenly. It happened gradually, as the conditions that once made it valuable were replaced by conditions that favored different plants and different systems. As agriculture expanded and food distribution networks developed across North America and Europe, the advantages of standardized crops became clear. Wheat could be grown in enormous quantities, harvested with machinery, stored in silos, and transported over long distances. The same was true of corn, rice, and potatoes. These crops were optimized over centuries for the requirements of large-scale production. Cattail was not. Its harvesting is manual and time-consuming. Its rhizome processing requires knowledge and labor that is difficult to mechanize. Its pollen window is brief. Its shoots require proximity to wetlands. None of these qualities disqualified it as food, but all of them made it impractical as a commercial commodity. Wetlands themselves were also transformed. Across the 20th century, enormous areas of wetland in North America and Europe were drained for agriculture, development, and flood control. The habitats where cattail thrived were reduced. Communities that had historically lived near marshes moved into urban and agricultural areas where different foods were available and expected. The knowledge did not disappear entirely. It retreated. It moved into specific communities, into the work of ethnobotanists, into the records of anthropologists, into the practices of foragers and naturalists who continued to document what was edible and why. But for most people, cattail became what it appears to be today, a common wetland plant with a distinctive brown spike, unremarkable, unimportant, passed without notice. For those interested in exploring traditional food systems and plant identification in greater depth, the first link in the description offers a practical guide to identifying and working with plants like cattail in wetland environments. What does current research say about cattail as a food source? The nutritional profile of cattail has been studied, though not as extensively as major commercial crops. Cattail pollen contains protein, carbohydrates, and various micronutrients. Cattail shoots, when harvested young, compare favorably to many common vegetables in terms of nutritional content per unit of weight. The rhizome starch is a straightforward carbohydrate source with no particular advantages or disadvantages compared to other root starches. There is no evidence that cattail is nutritionally superior to conventional foods in any dramatic sense. That is not the point being made here. The point is that it is food, real, documented, historically significant food. And it grows in abundance in environments that most modern food systems do not consider productive. Some researchers interested in food security and wetland ecology have revisited cattail in recent decades. Studies published in journals focused on agroforestry and ethnobotany have examined whether cattail could play a role in diversifying food systems in areas where wetland habitats remain intact. The conclusions are generally cautious. Cattail has real potential as a supplementary food source. Its integration into commercial systems faces genuine logistical challenges. The knowledge required to use it well is not widely held, but the plant itself is not scarce. It is not endangered. It does not require cultivation, fertilization, or irrigation. In many parts of the world, cattail stands are considered ecological nuisances and are actively managed to reduce their spread. The resource exists. What is missing is the context for understanding it. There is a particular kind of knowledge that does not travel well through modern educational systems. It is practical, seasonal, and local. It requires observation over time. It exists in relation to a specific landscape, rather than in abstraction from it. The knowledge of how to harvest and process cattail is exactly this kind of knowledge. It cannot be summarized in a single fact or reduced to a simple technique. It involves knowing when to look, where to look, what stage of growth to target, and how to prepare what is found. This is knowledge that was once passed from generation to generation through direct practice. When that transmission breaks, the knowledge does not necessarily disappear. It waits in records, in archives, in the observations of botanists and anthropologists who documented what they saw before conditions changed. It waits in the practices of communities who never fully abandoned it. And it waits in the landscape itself, in the plants still growing in ditches and marshes and along riverbanks, unchanged. What changed was not the plant. What changed was the attention paid to it. For those who want to explore this topic further, the first link in the description includes resources on traditional wetland plants and how communities historically documented and used them. Cattail is not a solution. It is not a secret. It is not a plant that industry suppressed or that experts overlooked by accident. It is a plant that thrived in a world organized around different priorities and retreated when those priorities changed. The wetland ecosystems it depends on became less central to food production as agriculture moved onto drained and cultivated land. The communities who knew how to use it became less central to broader food culture as urban and industrial systems expanded. None of that makes the plant less real or its history less significant. In marshes across North America, Europe, and Asia, cattail stands are growing right now, as they have grown for thousands of years. The brown spikes are visible from roads. The leaves rise straight from shallow water at the edges of ponds. The rhizomes extend below the mud, storing starch in the cold. Communities once built part of their food year around this plant. They wove its leaves into shelter and insulation. They collected its pollen in early summer and made it into bread. They dug its roots in late fall and processed the starch through the winter. That history is documented. The plant is still there. The landscape has not forgotten. It has simply been waiting for the attention to return.